Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Veritas Symantec NetBackup 7.7. What's new? How is management enhanced? Brought to you by Datalink. I'm Danielle Moore, Marketing Manager at Datalink, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your questions. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. Today's presenters will be Datalink Senior Systems Engineers Paul Weaver and Chette Boardman. They will provide an update on the latest version of Veritas NetBackup 7.7 and its capabilities, including a live demonstration of IVR and SQL intelligent policies. I would now like to turn over this presentation to our presenter, Chette Boardman. Chette, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone, and for those on Central Time, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We hopefully you'll get a lot of good information out of this. This is going to focus on the NetBackup 7.7 release. We're going to cover some of the changes, additions, and we think some of the changes you're going to notice immediately. Some of them may be a little more subtle, but we're going to dive into them. We'll also cover the HyperV intelligent policies and how they're implemented. And we will have two live demos that will show how these are set up, how they work, and give you some in-depth views into several of the features we're going to cover. One of them will be the IVR. We're going to use the new GUI-based wizard for NetBackup 7.7, and then we will cover the NetBackup SQL agent enhancements, which includes the SQL intelligent policies and how to set those up and how to use those in your environment. Started here. So let's start off with our agenda, which we just briefly covered, and we'll kind of go over what we're going to cover in the order we're going to cover it. We're going to start off with what's new in NetBackup. We'll cover the single administration Java console, HyperV intelligent policies, SQL intelligent policies, and the new IVR wizard, which I think a lot of our customers are going to find very useful. We'll cover some of what has changed, the VMware changes, and the Java console enhancements. We'll dive into that a little bit more. We'll move into the live demo phase where we will cover the IVR, which is the VMware and recovery wizard that can be used to instantly recover a virtual machine and have it online in some cases under 1 minute. You can have a restore that's live in your servers handing out data. We'll move into some of the troubleshooting, and we'll finish up with questions. So we'll start off with what's new. The biggest thing you're going to see in NetBackup 7.7 is the Java console. This is your sole administrative access to the NetBackup master server. This is all handled through a Java console. The Windows GUI is no longer included or supported for connecting to a 7.7 master server. You will not be able to use an existing Windows GUI. It will generate an error message telling you that the GUI version is outdated. So again, we're going to be using just the Java GUI. The legacy GUI is no longer even included in the installation. To that end, they've added a lot of functionality to the NetBackup Java console. A lot of the functionality previously found in Windows GUI is now brought into the NetBackup Java console. A lot of the little intricate features are there. Some have been left out and will be coming in future versions, and some other enhancements will be added as they move along through that. The new console is completely rewritten and is has a lot more functionality within it. You can pretty much do everything you'll need to do from within that GUI. When you install the Java GUI, It also will install all the back-level versions of Java so that if you have other master servers, you can connect to those older versions as well. It's just one installation. You don't have to have a new installation for every version. So that's one nice thing that immediately you'll see come out of this. And as of now, traditional NetBackup installation of 7.7 is released, and that includes Windows and non-Windows flavors, but it does not have a release for the appliance. The appliance version of 7.7, which will be 2.7, possibly 2.7.1, is not available yet. That is slated for later this year. We do not have a confirmed date on that yet. So let's move into HyperV intelligent policies. This is probably one of the biggest features that's been added to the NetBackup 7.7 release. That it was one of the most demanded features because of the way VMware backups are handled, where you design your query to query what your HyperV or VMware, in the case of VMware, what your servers have, to dynamically build that client list to back up your servers. They've now integrated that functionality within NetBackup 7.7 in the same fashion as VMware. You can now query your virtual machines to dynamically add clients to your policies. As this virtualization trend grows, this was one of the features that they needed to include. And HyperV is right now one of the leading alternatives to VMware. So now they've integrated that technology, and it has all the similar functionality to the VMware queries. Another feature they've added is the SQL intelligent policies. Similar to Oracle, which you saw released in 7.6.1, SQL intelligent policies provide a more effective way to protect and restore SQL databases. Essentially, you're being given the ability to query your SQL server to get your databases backed up in a nice, simple way. Right within your administrative GUI, you'll have your SQL option where you can group your instances together. You can dynamically pick up databases that are added to your policies, and you no longer need to create those batch files on each of your SQL clients. These files are generated automatically for you based on your selections. So it's going to allow you to dynamically add new databases, and your batch files are generated for you automatically. Some of the enhancements in the 7.7, we'll go in a little bit deeper here. The Java console. So now we have a single cross-platform management console. So this means that you can run this Java console from most of your workstations. Since it's Java-based, it's the same interface, whether you're using a Windows or a non-Windows client to launch your Java console. It looks the same. It's got the same functionality. And that's one of the nice features about this. Previous functionality within the Windows GUI has been moved into the Java-based GUI, so you'll have the option to navigate your activity monitor a little bit easier by using the little arrows within the job to go up and down, and a lot of the functionality from within the Windows GUI has been moved into Java. They do not plan to bring back the Windows GUI, so the Java console will be the method going forward. Let's switch back over to our HyperV intelligent policies, and we'll kind of give you some insight into how that works. With the addition of the intelligent policies, you're going to dynamically be able to pick up new virtual machines that have been added the same way you do with VMware. You're going to leverage your queries to capture the newly created VMs, and it's a lot simpler to use than going out and manually adding those virtual machines and risk missing a virtual machine that's been added from your backup, or on the other side of the coin, when the virtual machine has been removed or moved and your backup fails and you're looking for why that's happening. So with the intelligent policy, you no longer need to worry about that. You're going to be getting those new virtual machines right away. So to set this up, you don't need to make any policy changes once you have your policy defined. If you define your query loosely enough, you will be able to capture all those new virtual machines. but there's some requirements that you have to have in place. The first requirement is the HyperV server must have the NetBackup 7.7 client installed. So as with the previous versions that you backed up HyperV, you still have to install that client, and you have to make sure your integration tools are updated. With the 7.7, it's the same requirement to get that intelligent policy working. Your credentials need to be entered into your policy, and that will happen when you define your HyperV server in your policy. On the HyperV tab, you'll be prompted for your credentials. You'll add those in. The query is very similar to VMware in the way it formats. You'll have fields that you can query against, including display name, HyperV server, is it clustered or not, notes, and power state. And the structure of the query is almost identical to VMware, and this kind of keeps everything nice and consistent. So in a few moments here, Paul Weaver is going to be doing a demonstration of the IVR feature. And before he does that, what I'd like to do is kind of describe a little bit more detail in what happens with the IVR. In the 7.6 release, NetBackup did introduce the IVR, which is the instant VMware recovery. And what that allowed you to do is you have VMware backups, and it allowed you to restore a virtual machine in real time and have a virtual machine go from a state of needing to be restored, taking the steps to start the restore to the point that the VM is back online and actually serving data out to your environment. In the case of a file server is a good example. From the time you identify the need to recover the virtual machine to the time that you actually have that virtual machine online and serving out files to your end users, range can be from anywhere from a minute to 5 minutes. It all depends on the options you choose, but you can achieve runtime within a minute. So that's one of the key features for an instant recovery. No longer do you need to put that virtual machine, do the whole restore before your files are available. You're talking under a minute and you're live. In the 7.7 release, as you're about to see, that feature is now integrated with a nice little wizard. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Paul.
All right. Thanks, Chette. Again, I am Paul Weaver, and we'll be walking through a live demonstration of the instant recovery feature within NetBackup 7.7. Now, the feature had been included with NetBackup 7.6. However, it was command line only, so it wasn't used that much. But with 7.7, it has been integrated into the vSphere web client. There's a plugin that you can load into your vSphere web client server and make the connection into NetBackup. Now, to get started, I'm just going to show you real quick the Java GUI. Most of this looks the same, and this particular version of the Java GUI 7.7 is not backwards compatible with previous versions. However, with the 7.7 installation, they include what is needed to connect all the way back to a 7.0 server. So once you go to your Start menu, after loading in the Java console, you will see the options for 7.7, 7.6.1, 7.6, and back to 7.0 if those are needed in your environment. So you have that capability, though it will be in a different GUI that you start to do that. Now, for the intelligent policy restores, you'll see that we have gone through as part of setup for here and already done the plugin. The plugin takes a little bit to install, so we've already done that to save on the time to keep this presentation down. But I have gone through and I've already done some backups. As you can see here, I have some Windows policies. And when those backups run, as before with 7.6, you can see that in your VM. So if I pick a VM here to see.
Paul, Paul, I think you may be missing your, you might be a little bit lagged here,
all right.
so if you may want to hold up
a
second.
Yep.
Let things catch.
All right, let me redo that again.
Okay, it is buffering now, so I think you were lagged.
Okay. Yeah, I had some VPN connection issues, so catching up with that, which makes it interesting for live demos, of course. Let's see. Is it coming through now? Should be.
Yeah, we're seeing it now. It took a bit to buffer,
okay.
But we're seeing your VMware screen now.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll pop back to the Java console just so you can see the policies that I was talking about. And I've already done some of my backups, so I'll pick back up here. This is the vSphere web client that VMware is moving forward with. They're moving away from their previous client to a web-based version, and with 7.7 NetBackup from Veritas, that integration is now a lot better than it had been in the past. So what you can see here is a particular Windows 7 client that I have in my lab. And we'll click on the Monitor tab, and you can see the NetBackup button here. And that will show you, if you scroll over here, you can see the successes and the failures. So if you're a VMware administrator and you don't have access to the NetBackup admin console, you can still come in here and see the status of your backups of the VMs and do recoveries. But for this purpose, we're going to be demonstrating the instant recovery. So I will go home, and what you'll see is when the plugin is properly installed, you'll see the NetBackup plugin appear here. And then we'll click on that, and it brings up the options that you have here. As part of your installation, you will need to go through and do a setting it up. You'll need to add in the master server. If you have more than one master server, you can add that in here. It will work with more than one NetBackup master. And we'll just validate to show that it is working. Okay. And then the Settings tab at this point gives you the option, as you can see, for how long to keep the NetBackup events within VMware, how many instant recoveries per master server that you want to set as a max setting. And then if you want some defaults, like you always use a particular ESX host or a particular resource pool or a temporary data store, which I'll talk about in just a minute, you can define those here. Now, as part of instant recovery, what NetBackup does is it presents an NFS mount to the ESX host. So it's becoming an NFS data store from the VMware perspective. Now, this is a read-only data store because it's actually within the NetBackup disk pool. So what NetBackup needs, or what VMware needs, is a place to write temporary files as the machine is coming up. And so it needs a temporary location. It has to be an existing data store. And it will go away once you have finished the process, whatever process you may be, and we'll cover that again in just a minute. But it does need that temporary space to create the .vmx file and any other type of snapshot type stuff it might need. But to go on with this demonstration, what you'll do if you're a VMware administrator is just click on the instant recovery. and it will initialize. If you have more than one master server, which I don't in this particular lab, you will see here under the master servers, and you can select which one, as well as if you have multiple vCenters connected into your vSphere client, then you can also select that here. One thing I will add is that if you do have a NetBackup 7.6.1 master or earlier version, prior version, as well as a 7.7 master server, you will notice there will be a warning that will pop up that says that the plugin won't work because the master server is down rev. So you do have to have that NetBackup 7.7 master server in order for this functionality to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in part of the host name of the server I want to restore. You don't have to use wildcards. It automatically does that for you. And you can see on the search results that I have what appears to be two different entries for the same VM, and that's okay. At this point, all we have to do is pick one if you do have more than one, and we have to add it to the list. Just highlighting it doesn't work. So we have to add the virtual machine to the list. Now, if you have more than one VM that you're needing to do an instant recovery for, then you can just continue and do another search and then add that until the max number which we saw in the settings, which the default is 5. So we'll just click on next, and for this next screen, this is where you'll actually pick up or select which backup image that you want to use. By default, you'll see a 7-day search result, but you can have a 30-day, a 90-day, or select a custom range. So just to show you that we do have more, I'll select 90. And right now it's going through the NetBackup plugin to the master server to pull this information. But as a VMware administrator, once it's set up, you don't really have any other interaction that you need. So I'm just going to pick the most recent one. And what you'll want to do is when you select it, watch the backup image, the backup ID. That may change. Now in this particular instance, it's not because I selected the most recent. But you'll want to wait until this refreshes with the backup image that you do select. And then just go ahead and press the Select Image button. And okay, it's not, now this is a lab. There it goes. All right. And now you have your details of what was backed up. In this particular case, there were 2 VMDK files. It shows you their location of when it was backed up. Now, if we had set a default, like we talked about in the settings, then these would auto-populate, but you don't have to. So what I'm going to do is just pick the ESX host that I want to use as the restore. And I'm going to select my temporary data store. Now, if you do have more than one NetBackup media server, you can go through and select which one you want to use. So I'm just using the master server, which is the media server that did the backup for this lab, for this presentation. But you can use that accordingly. Now, at this point, you can change your display names, and this is if you have more than one server to do, you can come down here and add a common, like I like to add the -IR for instant recovery. That way I know it's because my other machine is still running in the lab, I don't I can't use the same name. So in this particular case, I don't want to retain the networks, but I do want it to power on immediately. So at this point, I'll come through, make sure everything is correct. And here you can see, again, the names that you have given it. And then you have to run your pre-recovery check. So it goes through and it's making sure that everything is set up for it to do its restore. Now, we'll see how this goes. It should take a few seconds more, but I will add that sometimes during preparation for this webcast, when I would do the recovery check, sometimes it would come back and say, it failed, but I knew it was all okay. So if you just press it again, if it does, then usually the second time, or at least for me, it would always pass. So in this case, it passed. If you want to see the details of what it was checking for, you can do that here. And at this point, it's ready to perform the instant recovery. So all we do is click Finish, and it initiates the job with the NetBackup master server. And at this point, once the master server receives the request, it starts building an NFS mount that it will present to the ESX host. And that comes in the form of, you will see two jobs if you're the NetBackup administrator. The top job is where it's presenting the NFS data store. And this should take maybe 10, 15 seconds, and it will depend upon your environment, of course. One, your master server. Two, what your vCenter server is running on, because it does have to perform those communications. So if you have a very large VMware environment with a single vCenter server, it may take a little bit longer, but it should go fairly quick. Now, we are in a lab environment, so the speed that you see here may not relate to the real world. But what we should see is it come back and saying that it's activated. Now, what the VMware administrator will see is once you do select Finish and it starts, you go to Events. Now, this is where the data store was created. And you can see that it's actually configuring it now, or reconfiguring it as it's called. And it's creating the virtual machine now. So if we actually come up here and start typing in, I'm just going to do IR for a quick search, we can now see the NFS data store as well as the virtual machine. So I'll just click on the virtual machine since VMware already knows about it. And again, this is running from the disk pool on the NetBackup media server. And it will be attempting to boot. You'll see the options. Okay, I'm going to open the console just so we can see that process. And so what we've demonstrated in this short time is that NetBackup can connect in and get a VM that you may need, whether it's an SQL server or whatever the case is, and get it up and running within minutes, versus the traditional method where you would have to create the virtual machine and then restore the data into its permanent data store. And that could take, 30 minutes. It could take an hour, depending upon, how much was backed up, your network speed, or whatnot. But you can see now that we're at the point where it's actually starting to boot the virtual machine. So it will be a little bit slower than a traditional data store. Yep.
We lost the demo.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Okay. Well, while that's doing that, I'll kick it back to you, Chette, to continue.
Okay.
But essentially at this point, we now have a virtual machine that is bootable. And then the final step, once it's up and running, is you can then vMotion it to its permanent location and then go back into the web console and complete that process. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chette.
Thank you, Paul. I apologize for the delay. We are seeing a little bit of an issue here with the live demo that Paul was just showing where he was demonstrating the IVR. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit more to kind of give you some insight what you may have missed. We apologize for the issues we're seeing there. As Paul just demonstrated, though, an IVR is a quick way to restore a virtual machine for your NetBackup. Essentially what's happening behind the scenes is that backup image that's stored on disk is being mounted and presented by the media server as an NFS share to VMware. VMware is then using that share as it would use any other NFS share to bring the virtual machine online. And in the background, what's happening is NetBackup is just leveraging the ability for you to access that backup ID, that image, as a virtual machine, and then allowing you to boot that virtual machine. So essentially, the gist of it becomes that NetBackup presents the backup image, VMware mounts it, and starts a virtual machine, and then any changes that are happening to the virtual machine are stored on the ESX data store. And depending upon what you're wanting to do with the virtual machine, in some cases it may be just to pull out a single file from the virtual machine, and in that case you may not necessarily even want the virtual machine to serve its normal function of being a file server or whatever that role is, and you would just pull out your file and then step back through the process of removing the virtual machine and disconnecting it. When you're doing that, you have no intention of bringing that virtual machine online for your public use. In the situation where you want to bring that virtual machine back into production, if you had a virtual machine that has crashed, you need to bring it back online. When you're using an IVR, you go through the same setup scenario. You're presenting that backup image. VMware mounts it, powers on that virtual machine. It automatically comes up online in your production environment, and your users are accessing the files and the resources that are available through that server. Any changes are being recorded in VMware in the data store that the virtual machine is going to. And then what you're doing is you're essentially vMotioning that backup, or vMotioning that virtual machine from the backup server to your data store, all while this virtual machine is serving data. So that's the demonstration that you just witnessed with Paul that some of you may have missed, and we do apologize. We're hoping that that's been fixed here, and we'll try another live demonstration here in a few moments. So in the event that you plan to keep your virtual machine, you're just going to vMotion it to its final data store, and during that entire time, your virtual machine is available for your users to access and leverage the resources. A couple words of caution. If you do not want your virtual machine to be brought online and available on your public network during your wizard, you do have the option to deselect the network or change it to a different network, which gives you the ability to pull out an individual file. And some of the reasons you may find that necessary, if you're using a form of single instance storage or deduplication, Windows has built-in deduplication. If you have enabled that for a volume, recovering a single file from a virtual machine backup does not work. You need to put back the entire virtual machine to pull out the file. And the reason for that is that single instance storage is a Windows Server specific function that's handled by the server. And what it's effectively doing is it creates a data store where it's holding the single version of the file, and that's not available when you're backing up the virtual machine as a virtual machine. We don't have the ability to see within that single instance database within the Windows internal database to be able to recover a single file. So in that case, you would want to put back your virtual machine using IVR, not make it available on the network, grab the file you'll need, and then just simply back out and not vMotion it and end the process. And it's very handy. It works very well. So let's look into some of the prerequisites that you'll need to have in place. Most of the prerequisites have already been met with previous versions of NetBackup. If you're doing virtual machine backups, most of those prerequisites are already there for you. For IVR to work using the GUI, as Paul mentioned, you need to have the NetBackup 7.7 media server, and your master server will need to be 7.7 as well, so that you have that vCenter plugin, which needs to be 7.7, has the wizard and the ability to go through and do that recovery right from within vCenter. The media server needs to have the server for NFS configured and started, which again, for most existing environments, that's already been done. If you're using granular recovery technologies for your Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, or you're doing VMware and file level recoveries, your server for NFS is already configured. And of course, the vCenter plugin needs to be version 7.7 or higher to facilitate that wizard to work for you. This functionality is available in the 7.6 release, but it's command line only. You don't have that nice GUI. It relies exclusively on command line. So that's one of the nice features of the VMware IVR in 7.7 release here and going forward. So next, what we'd like to do is we're going to move into the live demonstration of a SQL Intelligent policy and how the SQL Intelligent feature is integrated within your NetBackup 7.7. And for that, I'm going to turn you over to Paul Weaver again, and Paul will do that.
Okay, thank you, Chette, and hopefully this goes a little bit smoother than the first time. But to go back to the Java GUI for 7.7, the first change that you'll see is actually under the applications. There's an application tab here, and when you expand that out, you will now see a SQL Server entry. Prior to 7.7, it was just Oracle, but again, with the 7.7 release, they have integrated this into the GUI and given it intelligence for grouping and for auto discovery as well. Now, I will preface that just a tad that the NetBackup 7.7 client does have to be installed on the SQL Server, and it does have to have the same permissions as before for the NetBackup client service. So all that has to be set up just as before, but once it is set up, then you will start to see in your master server your SQL instances starting to populate. And in this particular case, you can see I actually have 3 that are registered and 4 that are seen. And you can expand these fields out as needed to see which server is where and what version of SQL is running and what edition. There are some fields over on the right side registered in policies. When the GUI first reports an instance, it's not going to be registered. So there are several things that you can do here. You now have the ability to create what's called instance groups. So you could create an instance group for version of SQL, for example, like I have done here. Or you could do something like test, Q&A, and production if you want to segregate your SQL by function. So you could do that, but essentially what you can do is just create those groups, and you create a new instance group, and you can give it a name, And if there's common credentials for each of those servers, you can go ahead and enter that in here. I'll just call it test. Or if there's not common credentials, then you can use the ones that are defined locally on the client. But for this particular one, I'm just going to add in my NetBackup service account, add in my password, and add in my domain, and then click OK. Now that just creates an instance group. It doesn't actually go out and verify at that time the password because there are no clients that are a part of that group. Now what you can do here is once you do have an instance that has been discovered, you can go into and click register. So NetBackup has that information. Now I've already registered this, but again that form looks similar. You can add it to a group that's already existing, and then you can give it its credentials. But I have already done that, so we can continue with this demo. But you can see for my instance groups, I just have one server in each of my groups. Now what the instance group allows you to do, besides backing up those machines per se as a group, but in the policy it allows you to define, and I will go through and show you here in one of my policies, you can define an instance group within the policy. So you don't have to go in and list specific SQL servers here. We'll kind of walk through the changes right now with that. But again, you'll need to make it an SQL server. And you'll notice some tabs are now available that weren't available in previous versions. One is the instance and databases. And this allows you to, as we just mentioned, either add in an instance group, or if you have a particular client, you can do that. Or if you want to use the traditional method where you create the batch file on the SQL server, then you can come in and select clients for use with batch files to do the traditional way. I've already have my 2012 group added here for simplicity for the webcast, and so we'll jump to the SQL Server tab. Now on the SQL client, on the server itself, if you would go into the NetBackup GUI, you could set different parameters that applied to that specific client for those backups, including stripes, transfer size, block size, that type of information. Well, that has now all been moved onto the master server into the policy, as you can see here. And so this will also lead, if you have a group of SQL servers that need, certain characteristics, like they can only handle 2 stripes per backup because they're on slower hardware rather than newer hardware, you could create a group for that. And then in here you would go and define how many stripes for that backup that you want SQL to perform. One new feature here is the bottom option here, convert differential backup to full when no full exists. That is a handy option if for some reason the full has expired. You're not going to continue to do full incrementals. It will realize that that full is now missing and create a full from that. And over on the transaction log side over here, you can do truncate logs after backup, or it can also convert the log backups to full, again, if no full exists. And you don't have to come in here to do anything with the backup selection, but this, unless needed, the default is whole database, so it will back up everything. Or if you need to do your files or file groups like was available in earlier versions, you can define that here, but by default, it will back up everything. So at that point, all we have to do is click OK. And I will run a sample backup for you. And let it run. And then we'll go back to the activity monitor. Now, because it's in a group, it's checking all the clients that are in that group and attempting to initiate a backup. Now, I only have, again, one server in each group, but you can now see that you have a parent job, and the databases are starting to kick off. There will be one backup job per database. So if you have a lot of instances with a lot of databases, the GUI can get kind of filled up with that. But one of the new features with 7.6 was the ability to view the jobs in a hierarchy format. So you can collapse these as well. And then it's just going to start processing, based upon what we set it for. So those are an example of the new SQL intelligent policy. And with that, I will send it back to you, Chette.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the live demo. That worked out really well. I hope everyone saw that and got a lot out of that. So let's talk about what we just saw here. So as Paul demonstrated here, management of SQL backups is much simpler now. I mean, you don't need to create those batch files and hope you've got every database and have 3 different batch files for 3 different policies. So this simplifies things a lot more for you. The legacy backup method is still fully supported. That's one thing I do want to point out, is that you still use the BCH files if you choose to do so. That is still fully supported, and the functionality is still there to do that. So let's look at some of the requirements that are necessary to leverage the SQL intelligent policies. And these are some of the same requirements that are necessary for traditional backups of your SQL databases, but we'll cover those to make sure that you have those in place. The user has to have your SQL sysadmin role, and that's just necessary within SQL. You have to have sysadmin role to be able to perform some of the functions within SQL. That needs to be in place. The user has to be a member of the Windows administration group, whether that is a local administrator or a domain administrator group. That has to be present, and that's one of the previous requirements as well that had to be in place. The account for the NetBackup client service and the NetBackup legacy services can be either a SQL administrator or a local administrator account, and that ties into the previous requirement for being in the Windows administrator group. So that account needs to be either in the local administrators group or domain administrators group to give it permissions to access SQL. The services must all use the same account. And what that's saying there is that if you choose an account for any of the legacy network services, that's the same account you should use for the client service as well. So you wouldn't want to mix that up and have either different accounts, or one running as local system and one as a specific account. You should make them all the same, not only for consistency's sake, but to ensure that this works properly. You'll need to make sure that they are the same account. Though clustering isn't supported with the SQL intelligent policies, you'll still see those showing up in there, even though it isn't supported. And in future versions, that is expected to change, although there's no statement to that I have seen. That is something that they are looking into, supporting of clustering, and that will just simply be something that's added in to the GUI to allow support for clustering, but currently that isn't supported. So now let's move on to our next slide here, where we're going to discuss some of the troubleshooting and log gathering you can do with 7.7, if you've implemented some of these features, what to look for if things don't work right on the first try. So with the SQL logging, logging is more or less the same as it was with previous versions of NetBackup where you're using the legacy method with the batch files. Those same logs still apply. You're going to use DB client, BP, HDB, user underscore ops, and MSSQL logs folder, NB discovery, and the MBCS logs are still used in the same manner, and logging is still happening there, even though you're not creating those BCH files. In the background, that's being done for you, and so that logging is going to stay the same for you. And another excellent option for troubleshooting is using the logging assistant. This is a wizard-driven interface within the NetBackup administration console. Along the left side, you'll see the logging assistant near the bottom. And the reason this is becoming an excellent alternative to legacy log gathering is that this incorporates the VX logging, legacy logging, and robust logging. Any logging that you will need to do has been incorporated in that logging assistant, and you simply set up a task for capturing those logs, and then you recreate that failure. So that will allow you to set up the logging, recreate the failure, and then gather the logging. And you're doing that right from within the administration console, and there's no need to go out to each individual client, create the folders. It's going to do all that for you. It's going to create the folders. It's going to increase the logging level. And that is also a great option for IVR and any of the NetBackup troubleshooting you'll need to do for any of the features and any of the core product functionality. That's all included in there. You'll choose your processes, and they put it in a nice wizard-based setup with options for not only individual processes, but to capture logging for individual operations. So by that I mean if you're attempting a restore, it's going to suggest for you different processes to capture the logs for. So that's a great feature to look into. Since IVR is similar to your VMware restores, the logging is roughly the same as well. You're going to be looking at BPFIS, TAR, BPDBM, BPBRM, BPDM. Those will contain the majority of the logs. Since this is primarily a media server-driven restore, you're also going to be looking at the NBFSD daemons for the NFS mounts. Those will be important. And one that is really critical on both of these is going to be, in the case of Windows, your event viewer logs. Because this is SQL we're working with, you'll want to, in the SQL instances, you'll want to look in those logs and look within the SQL logs. For the VMware side, you'll want to look at within the messages on non-Windows machine, event viewer on Windows machines, and you'll be looking at these on the media server for the VMware restores using IVR. Because we're using NFS on the non-Windows, NFS is part of the operating system, and it's a matter of having it enabled. So that's going to log to your messages by default. For Windows, you will see some of the information logged within the Windows Event Viewer. So those are going to be key to troubleshooting your issues as well, specific to SQL Intelligent Policies and the IVR. And so with that, I'd like to open up any questions here. We'll take a look at the questions we have and see if there are any that we want to address on the live call here. So one of the questions I do see here is 7.7 with PowerShell API. I have not seen the integration with PowerShell. That is an item that is being discussed. They're talking about integrating tighter with PowerShell, and that will be coming in a future version. So I have seen discussions on that, but I don't have anything official on that. Another question I see out here is there a logging cleanup wizard? And I'm assuming that is in reference to the logging assistant. With the logging assistant, when you create your record for logging and you've gone through the troubleshooting process and you've gathered those logs and looked through them, once you've completed your troubleshooting, you have the ability to go in there and disable that logging record, and what that's going to do for you is turn down all the logs, and you can choose to completely disable the logging, so it's just going to turn it completely off for you. It's not going to log anymore. And then go back in there. You can leave that record present. Let's say you're going to troubleshoot that same issue on those same servers. You can turn the logging back up just by re-enabling your logging and turning your logging level up. So that does have the ability from with one central place to turn down logging, disable logging for all the clients involved. When you're running through the logging assistant, you're going to be specifying which media server, which master server, obviously the master server you're running it from, but in the case of having multiple media servers, maybe only one media server is involved in a particular operation, you'll choose that media server, and then the client is the same thing. If it's only one client, in the case of SQL, you would choose that client, and you're only going to turn up logging for that client, but you're doing that right from the master interface. So once you've completed your troubleshooting, you'll just disable that logging and it will do that for you. Another question I see here, since we've converted over to the Java console, is job hierarchy still available? Yes, the job hierarchy is in the NetBackup 7.7 interface. You do have that ability, and you still can customize that, the same as the Windows GUI. You can customize how the hierarchy is set up. You can disable it or enable it. That is in 7.7. That was a good question. Okay. The question regarding PowerShell. That's something that we will have to look in a little further. So the question is that in a follow-up in regards to PowerShell, is that remembering the commands and the difference between commands in PowerShell versus command line. So that's something we'd have to look into a little further, and it's really not a developed feature that has been something that is promoted. And when I say that, I mean that it's not something that they are promoting as a major feature. It is something that they're integrating in, and it's a slow integration. So that's something that we need to look into a little bit deeper. And I would expect in the coming versions, as PowerShell becomes the primary focus of the Windows operating system, that we will see less and less of the command line and more of the PowerShell type interface. But that's something that is being handled by the development team. So it's going to be a little bit of, I think right now it's an underdocumented thing that definitely needs some clarification. Any of the questions that you have posted in here that have not been answered will be answered. You can expect a follow-up on those. We do answer all the questions that have been presented. We have engineers that will take those questions. So it may be a little bit, as some of them will need research. We'll need to apply that research and to get you an accurate answer on those. So please do be patient with us, but we will get those answered for you. With that, Daniel, I'm going to turn that back over to you here. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope this has been useful for you. And again, we'll answer those questions for you and look for our next presentations coming forward. Daniel?
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available within 2 to 3 days. You will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Thank you again for participating.